Renee James, a single mother who put all her energy into her only child, Riley. I have a question. If you learn that another child was suffering from trauma and your child was the only person that could help, would you allow your child to help that child? Let me know what you think by leaving a comment below. Renee James moved with quiet purpose through the small kitchen of their 2-bedroom apartment, her scrubs already wrinkled from the early shift at the clinic. A second cup of coffee in hand, she glanced at the clock. 6:42 a.m. In 18 minutes, she'd have to wake Riley. Riley James, 10 years old and whip smart, already had her backpack lined up by the door and her math workbook open on the table. She was always one step ahead, a girl who found patterns in puzzles and answers in equations. Science fairs were her playground, gravity, chemistry, coding, she devoured it all. But Renee had made sure Riley's world wasn't just formulas and flashcards. She needed balance. So, on Saturdays, Riley played soccer with scrappy determination, the smallest on the field, but never the weakest. Sundays were for church youth group, where she laughed louder than anyone, her voice carrying through the rec room like sunlight. It hadn't been easy. Renee's ex-husband Thomas had left when Riley was 6. He lived 3 towns over now, in a new house with a new wife. He called on birthdays. Sometimes. Riley had stopped asking why about a year ago. Renee had swallowed her bitterness, shelved her heartbreak, and poured her love into building a life that felt whole. Between double shifts at the hospital and impromptu dance battles in their tiny living room, she did everything she could to make sure Riley never felt half-loved. One evening, after soccer, Riley collapsed on the couch and said, "You know, Mom, some of the kids have 2 parents, but I think I'm still luckier." Renee blinked hard. "Why's that?" Riley shrugged, pulling her knees to her chest. "Because you show up twice as much." And in that moment, Renee knew she was doing just fine. One evening, Renee was caught in a long emergency shift at the hospital, and with no time to pick Riley up from soccer practice, their neighbor Andy stepped in. Andy was the kind of neighbor who made extra cookies, just in case, and always kept a spare key to Renee's place. She pulled up in her old Jeep, Riley's cleats thudding against the floorboard. "You sure you'll be okay hanging out at the hospital for a bit?" Andy asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Riley nodded. "And bring my sketch pad. I like it there. It's like a big puzzle full of stories." Up on the 4th floor waiting room, Riley found a corner by the window. She kicked off her cleats, pulled out a crinkled snack cake from her backpack, and scanned the room. That's when she saw him, a boy around her age, sitting alone near the vending machine. Clothes looked slept in, and he had that guarded look she'd seen on kids at the community center, the kind who learned early not to expect too much. Riley walked over slowly, snack in hand. "Want one?" she asked. He looked at her, hesitated, then took it without a word. Just a small nod. Riley gave a little smile and went back to her chair, pulled out her markers and started to draw. A rainbow arched across the sky, with a big yellow sun beaming in the corner. Under it, she drew 2 stick figures, one big, one small, standing next to a red heart. A while later, Renee stepped out of the double doors, fatigue in her eyes but her smile intact. "Let's go, sweetheart." Riley stood up, walked back to the boy, and gently handed him the picture. "This is my mom, Renee," she said softly. "She helps people, and she's a good listener. If you ever need to talk, ask for her. She's here a lot." The boy didn't say anything, just stared at the drawing. Renee smiled at him gently. Then mother and daughter turned and walked down the hallway, hand in hand, leaving a little color behind in a quiet boy's world. The next afternoon, Renee was organizing charts behind the nurse's station when a man approached her. Tall, a little weathered, with kind eyes and a worn denim jacket. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Are you Renee?" She looked up, a little surprised. "Yes, I am. I'm Connor Randell. Your daughter gave my son a drawing yesterday. I just wanted to say thank you." Recognition dawned on her face. "Oh, your son was the boy on the 4th floor." "Yeah, Tatum." Connor nodded, hands in his pockets. "My father had just been admitted. We were getting him settled in his room, but Tatum, he didn't want to go in. Seeing my dad like that scared him. He just froze in the hallway." Renee's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope your father recovers quickly." "It's going to be a slow road," Connor said, exhaling. "But he's tough. He'll get there." He paused, looking toward the waiting area. "My son's a quiet kid. Always has been. But after your daughter gave him that picture, he held on to it the whole way home. Didn't say much, but he didn't let go of it either. I was wondering, would she maybe be willing to draw more? It seemed to calm him." Renee smiled. She would love that. That Monday, after school, Riley came into the hospital with her sketchbook under one arm and a folder of freshly drawn pictures tucked in the other. She wore her favorite sneakers, one shoelace always untied, and a soccer sticker stuck to her backpack. Connor was already waiting in the fourth-floor lounge. Tatum sat beside him, legs swinging just above the floor, holding the same rainbow drawing from before, edges now soft from handling. Riley slid onto the seat next to him without a word and opened her sketchpad. She handed him a new picture, a treehouse with 2 kids in it, and a ladder that reached all the way down to the grass. Tatum took it, eyes tracing every line. Then he pulled out a crayon from a cup on the table and slowly started to draw. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. Connor sat beside Renee, watching the 2 kids color in their quiet rhythm. Renee glanced at the kids, then back at Connor, saying maybe it takes someone his size to show up. They stayed like that for nearly an hour, exchanging paper and silent smiles. Riley drew a rocket ship and passed it to Tatum. He added stars in the background, then handed it back. When it was time to go, Tatum looked up at Riley and whispered, "Thanks." She smiled. "See you next time." And with that, the girl who solved problems like puzzles and the boy who didn't have the words yet had formed something small and steady. Something that mattered. Over the next couple of weeks, Riley and Tatum met regularly at the hospital after school. It became a quiet routine. Connor would bring Tatum, and Renee would meet them during her break or right after her shift. The 2 kids would sit in the same spot by the big window, drawing worlds only they could imagine. Slowly, as if testing the air around him, Tatum began to talk. First just a few words, then sentences, then full stories about school, his dog Jasper, and the old treehouse in his backyard. Riley never pushed. She just listened, nodded, and kept drawing. Then one Friday, everything changed. Tatum asked Riley to go with him to see his grandpa. Riley said let's go, then took him by the hand and walked to the room. Tatum stood by the doorway to his grandfather's hospital room, staring inside. Riley stood next to him, holding his hand. He looked up at her, uncertain. "You don't have to be scared," Riley whispered. "He's just your papa. He still loves you." Tatum swallowed hard. Then he nodded. Inside the room, Silas lay propped up in bed, eyes open, the tiredness in his face softening as he spotted them. He smiled, weak but real. "Hey there, buddy," Silas rasped. And just like that, Tatum ran forward and wrapped his arms around his grandfather with all the strength a small body could muster. "I'm sorry, Papa," he cried. "I didn't mean to be scared. Please get better. I promise I'll be good forever if you just come back home." Silas laughed gently, his voice rough but warm. "You don't have to be perfect, Tatum. Just be you. That's more than enough." Outside the room, Renee and Connor watched, silent and moved. And beside the hospital bed, Riley quietly smiled, her fingers smudged with marker ink, knowing she'd helped build a bridge words alone couldn't cross. While Riley helped Tatum find his voice again, their parents were getting to know each other too. Quiet conversations over hospital coffee, shared glances across waiting rooms, and the kind of slow trust that builds between 2 people carrying different kinds of pain. After Tatum's visit with his grandfather, Renee and Connor sat on a bench outside the hospital under a flickering security light. The kids were inside, trading drawings and stories. The air was cool, carrying the scent of distant rain. Renee sipped from her paper cup. She began by saying, "Riley's dad left when she was 6. He met someone else, just decided one day he wanted a new life. Before he left, I kept trying to fix things until I realized I was the only one still showing up." Connor nodded, his expression calm but thoughtful. "I'm sorry, that's hard." She shrugged. "I got used to doing things on my own. Double shifts, school meetings, soccer games. I just didn't want her to feel like she was missing anything." He took a slow breath. "I get that. My wife Marissa passed when Tatum was 2. Car accident. No warning, no time to say goodbye. My dad stepped in right away. I don't know what I would have done without him. I threw myself into work just to keep from breaking." "What do you do?" Renee asked. "I run a small accounting firm, mostly small businesses, some nonprofits. It's steady, reliable." She smiled. "That sounds nice, predictable. I'm in the chaos every day. Clinic, ER, late nights, early mornings." Connor chuckled. "And somehow you still show up for everyone, including my kid." Their eyes met, something unspoken passing between them. Shared strength, quiet understanding. Maybe healing wasn't just happening in patient rooms or through drawings. Maybe it was happening right there too. The day finally came when Dr. Patel walked into Silas's hospital room with a smile. "Good news," he said. "We'll be discharging you soon. You're recovering well, but you'll need some home care for the next few weeks, just to make sure everything stays on track." Connor nodded, relieved. "That's great to hear, Doc. We'll make sure he's taken care of." Later that afternoon, Connor sat with Silas in the hospital room, going over options for home care. Silas, still a bit tired but sharp as ever, leaned back in his chair. I don't need a stranger hovering over me, son. Someone I trust. Tatum, sitting on the floor near the foot of the bed, was pretending to draw, but he was clearly listening. What about Miss Renee? He asked suddenly, looking up. She helps people already, and then she won't have to work so hard at night. When she leaves here, she can get Riley, and they can come to our place and go home later. Connor and Silas exchanged a glance, half surprised, half amused. But the more they thought about it, the more it made sense. Later that day, Connor found Renee in the break room. She was mid-coffee, clearly on her feet all day. Hey, he said, can I run something by you? She looked up, curious. Sure, he explained the situation. Silas's recovery plan, the need for home care, and then Tatum's suggestion. I know it's a big ask, he said, but I'd match your current salary from the hospital. You'd be working evenings at our house, nothing too demanding, just making sure Dad's okay, and honestly, keeping Tatum company too. Renee blinked, caught off guard. You want me to leave the hospital and come work for you? I want you to work less for everyone else, Connor said, and more for yourself and Riley. You'd have more time with her. You'd still be doing what you're good at, helping. You can maintain your morning shift, no more double shifts at the hospital. She hesitated, weighing it carefully. After a long pause, she smiled. I need thine to think, but if Riley's in, I'm in. And just like that, a new chapter began. Not in a hospital, but in a home where healing was already underway. At exactly 3 p.m., Renee turned her car slowly onto the long, winding driveway, eyes wide as the house came into view. The Randell home wasn't just a house, it was an estate. A large, ivy-trimmed colonial with tall windows, stone walkways, and a wraparound porch that looked like it belonged in a magazine. For a moment, she hesitated, double-checking the address on her phone. Mom, Riley whispered, peering out the window. Are we at the right place? This looks like a mansion. I was just wondering the same thing, Renee murmured. Before she could overthink it, the front door swung open. Connor stepped out with a smile and stood beside him, waving excitedly. You're in the right place, Connor called out, grinning. Welcome. As they climbed the front steps, Renee looked around, still stunned. Your home is beautiful, Connor. Thanks, my grandparents had it built years ago. I was raised here, he said, stepping aside to let them in. Only time I lived anywhere else was during college. Inside, the home was just as grand as the outside, spacious, warm, and full of character. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, and the soft scent of fresh bread coming from the kitchen. But it didn't feel stuffy or cold. It felt lived in, full of memories. Renee and Riley greeted Silas, who was resting comfortably in the living room. He smiled warmly at them, his eyes especially lighting up when he saw Riley. There's my favorite artist, he said. Tatum wasted no time. He grabbed Riley's hand. Come on, I want to show you the backyard. The two kids disappeared through the sliding doors, laughter trailing behind them. Meanwhile, Renee followed Connor into the kitchen, where they began preparing dinner together. Something simple and warm: baked chicken, roasted vegetables, and cornbread. As they chopped, stirred, and set the table, they discussed Silas's recovery plan. Renee laid out meal guidelines from the doctor, while Connor took notes on the exercise schedule. We'll rotate light walks with chair exercises for the first 2 weeks, Renee said, arranging papers on the counter. Then slowly build from there. And I'll handle the grocery runs and meds, Connor replied. You just make sure we're doing everything right. By the time dinner was ready, they had a full plan in place, and a sense that, somehow, this new arrangement wasn't just about recovery. It felt like the beginning of something better for them all. One evening around 4 p.m., dark clouds began to gather over the Randell estate. The wind picked up, whistling through the trees, and the sky turned a deep shade of gray. Renee glanced at the window as the first boom of thunder rattled the glass panes. Looks like a storm's rolling in, she said, her voice calm but alert. Tatum, who had been coloring at the kitchen table with Riley, immediately stiffened. Is Dad gonna be okay? He asked, his eyes wide as he looked toward the front door. He's still at work, Renee said gently, kneeling beside him. But he'll be home soon. Your dad knows how to handle storms. Still, Tatum couldn't shake the worry. He kept glancing at the clock, hugging a pillow to his chest. Just as a heavy gust of wind shook the house and a loud crack of thunder hit, the front door flew open. Connor stepped inside, soaked from the rain, briefcase in one hand, jacket dripping. I'm home, he called out, breathless. Dad? Tatum ran and threw his arms around him, clinging tightly. Connor dropped his things and wrapped him in a hug, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. It's just a storm, buddy. We're safe. In the den, Renee had already begun building a blanket fort, gathering cushions, quilts, and snacks. "Okay, team," she said, rallying the kids. "Operation Cozy Fort is officially in effect." Riley crawled in with a flashlight and a bowl of popcorn, while Tatum followed, finally smiling. Then, with a sudden flicker, the lights went out. The house fell into darkness, and the only sound was the storm raging outside. From the living room, Silas's voice called out, steady and warm. "Well, looks like it's story time." He sat calmly on the sofa, lantern light flickering beside him, and began sharing tales from when he was a boy, of fishing trips, mischief with his brothers, and storms that once knocked out power for days. The kids listened, wide-eyed, tucked deep into the fort. Connor and Renee moved through the house, gathering flashlights and setting up lanterns, their shoulders occasionally brushing, their voices hushed and steady. Later, when the storm showed no sign of letting up, Renee and Riley stayed the night. As the kids drifted to sleep in the fort, and Silas snored softly from his chair, Connor stood quietly by the doorway, watching the scene, his son safe, his father calm, and Renee and Riley curled up like they'd always belonged. And in that flickering, quiet moment, Connor's heart melted. His house had never felt so full. After that stormy night, something quietly shifted between Renee and Connor. It wasn't dramatic or rushed, just small things. The way he waited for her in the kitchen to drink coffee before work. The way she laughed at his dry jokes more easily. How Riley and Tatum moved like siblings now, sharing secrets and arguing over board games like they'd known each other forever. Silas noticed first. He sat back and observed like a man who'd lived long enough to recognize when something real was blooming, whether the two of them admitted it or not. One afternoon, while Connor helped him with his leg stretches, Silas cleared his throat. "You like her," he said bluntly. Connor looked up, caught off guard. "She's great, but I don't know if we're ready for anything beyond friendship. I mean, she's technically your caregiver. There are rules, boundaries." Silas smirked. "Son, if the only thing in the way is her job title, I have no problem firing her. I'll even type up the paperwork myself if it gets you two on a date." Connor chuckled, shaking his head. "Let us figure it out ourselves, okay?" Silas didn't press, but later that week, while Renee was organizing Silas's medication chart, he casually brought it up again. "Connor's a good man," he said, not looking up. "Bit of an overthinker, but solid." Renee smiled, keeping her focus on the paperwork. "He's been kind, but we're just friends, and I'm here for work. Besides, it's not that simple dating again." "Never is," Silas said, nodding. "That's why I'm moving to Plan B." She looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Plan B?" He didn't answer, just gave her a sly smile and sipped his tea. Silas had made up his mind. If they weren't going to admit their feelings, he'd help nudge them in the right direction. Quietly, of course. Silas had been planning the cookout all week, and by Saturday afternoon, the backyard was buzzing with life. Folding chairs circled around the grill, laughter echoed off the tall trees, and the smell of smoked ribs and grilled corn hung thick in the air. Family and friends mingled freely, but Silas had one guest in particular he was counting on to stir things up: Jack. Jack was everything Silas remembered, tall, confident, with a velvet-smooth voice that could charm a room without trying. Silas greeted him with a grin and a subtle nod toward Renee, who was setting plates on the patio table. Jack got the message. "Hi Renee, I'm Jack," he said as he approached, extending a hand and flashing a disarming smile. "Friend of Silas, and clearly a lucky man to be introduced to you today." Renee blinked, surprised, but smiled warmly. "Nice to meet you, Jack." Within minutes, she was laughing at something he said. She looked relaxed, her eyes lighting up as they chatted. Jack had that way about him, comfortable and smooth, like he'd known you for years. Just then, Connor stepped into the room with a tray of drinks and stopped short, his gaze locked onto Renee and Jack, and something inside him twisted. He tried to brush it off, but the laughter between them kept tugging at his attention. When Renee stepped away to check on the kids playing out front, Connor casually walked over to Jack. "She's not your type," Connor said, voice low but steady. Jack took a sip from his drink, unfazed. "You sure about that? I think she's exactly my type. I'm looking to settle down." Connor stiffened. "She has a child." Jack smiled. "So? I'm still growing up myself. Me and the kid would probably get along great." Connor opened his mouth to reply, but just then, Renee returned. She smiled as she stepped between them, unaware of the weight that had just passed in her absence. "Everything okay?" she asked. Connor forced a smile. "Yeah, just chatting." But Silas, watching from the grill, smirked to himself. This is great, Plan B was working. As the sun dipped low behind the trees and the last of the guests trickled out, the backyard quieted. Silas leaned back in his chair with a smug smile, satisfied with how the evening had gone. Jack, ever the gentleman, found Renee near the patio steps as she was collecting leftover napkins and cups. "It was great talking with you today," Jack said, his voice as smooth as ever. "Looking forward to seeing you Saturday." "Same here," Renee replied with a polite smile. Connor, who was helping Tatum put away games nearby, overheard. His head snapped up. "Saturday?" he asked, approaching a little too quickly. "What's happening Saturday?" Renee blinked, surprised by his tone. "Jack's coming to Riley's science fair. He asked if he could come, and Riley likes him. They hit it off. Thought it'd be nice to have someone else there cheering her on." Connor's mouth opened, but no words came out at first. He hadn't expected that. "Well," he said finally, trying to steady his voice, "Tatum and I will be there too. Obviously." Renee gave a small, amused smile. Of course, it's important to her. Saturday arrived fast. The school gym was buzzing with excitement. Colorful trifold boards lined the room, and kids buzzed with last-minute explanations and nerves. Riley stood proudly beside her project on renewable energy, beaming. Jack showed up in a crisp polo and a grin, making a direct line for Renee and Riley. "There she is, the future of clean energy," he said, clapping dramatically. "This is brilliant, Riley. You're going to change the world." Riley giggled, clearly enjoying the attention. Connor, standing across the aisle with Tatum, clenched his jaw. Jack was laying it on thick, too thick. Every time Riley spoke, Jack acted like he'd just been given a Nobel lecture. Every compliment, every laugh with Renee felt like a jab straight to Connor's gut. His face grew red. He crossed his arms. Even Tatum looked up and whispered, "Dad, are you okay?" Connor forced a smile. "I'm fine." But he wasn't, not even close. After the science fair, they decided to grab lunch. Just Renee, Connor, the kids, and a quiet booth at a local diner. Jack had politely declined, saying he had other plans, and Connor hadn't exactly looked disappointed. But during lunch, something was off. Connor barely said a word unless spoken to. His usual easy presence was replaced by clipped replies and long stretches of silence. Even Tatum noticed, nudging his dad once with a questioning glance. Renee kept trying to draw Connor into the conversation, but he brushed it off with a tight smile or a shrug. By the time they got home, Renee couldn't stop thinking about Connor's behavior. On Monday, after checking in on Silas and making him a cup of tea, she finally asked, "Can I ask you something?" Silas looked up from his crossword. "Shoot. What's going on with Connor? He's been different since Saturday." Silas laughed, a deep, satisfied rumble. "You and Jack." Renee blinked. "What?" "It's you and Jack. Connor's in a tailspin." "Silas," she said carefully, "Jack and I we're not together." He raised an eyebrow. "Renee, I know you've been out of the game a while, but come on, what kind of guy asks to go to a science fair if he isn't trying to impress the mom?" Renee let that sink in as she slowly lowered herself into the chair across from him. The realization made her chest tighten. "If Connor's upset," she started. Silas nodded, finishing her thought. "Then he's jealous." Renee sat there quietly, unsure what to do with that information. Her heart fluttered at the thought, but her mind was racing. "He'll be home around 5, Silas added with a sly grin. "Might be a good time to talk, before I start planning another cookout." Renee nodded slowly, suddenly very aware of just how complicated things had gotten and how much she might actually care. For the next few nights, Renee slipped in and out of the Randall home like a shadow. She still did her job, checked Silas's vitals, prepped meals, kept the kids on track, but her presence felt distant, rehearsed. She avoided lingering conversations with Connor, found tasks to do in other rooms, and made sure to never be alone with him. "Just working on a new diet plan for Silas," she said one night, not meeting Connor's eyes. "I need to review alternative meds," she claimed the next. By the third evening, she mumbled something about studying for continuing education. Though Silas, amused, quietly told Connor, "I'm pretty sure she already finished that course." Connor watched her pull away with growing frustration. The woman who used to sit beside him over tea, laugh with the kids, and fill the house with warmth, now kept a wall between them. Every excuse was another brick. By the fourth night, he'd had enough. The kids were eating dinner in the den, giggling over a cartoon, and Silas was napping in his recliner. Renee was in the kitchen, reaching for plates when Connor stepped in and closed the door softly behind him. "Renee," he said. She didn't look up. "I was just going to—" "Stop, please stop," he said, his voice sharper than usual. She froze. He took a step closer. "Stop running from me, please." She turned, eyes wide, startled by his tone. "We need to talk," he said, quieter now but firm. "We need to stop pretending nothing's happening between us, because something is happening." Renee opened her mouth, but no excuse came out. She just stared at him, breath caught in her throat. Connor shook his head. "I get it. It's complicated. You're scared. Well, I am too. But this, he motioned between them, this is real, and we owe it to ourselves to stop dodging it. The air between them was heavy, charged, and for the first time in days, Renee didn't retreat. She didn't speak yet, but she didn't run either. As the tension in the kitchen began to ease, Connor took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Renee," he said softly, "stay the night." Her brows furrowed. "Connor, I don't mean like that," he said quickly, hands up. "I mean stay. We've got more rooms than we know what to do with. I can't go another day walking around you like you're not the most important part of this house. The kids are happy, my dad's doing better, but me, I'm stuck pretending this isn't tearing me up." Renee stood still, her heart thudding in her chest. "Let's just talk," Connor said, "when the kids are asleep, no distractions, just us." She hesitated, but then nodded. "Okay." Later that night, after the kids were tucked in and the house had gone quiet, Renee sat with Connor in the den. A storm outside had just passed, but something just as heavy was being lifted inside. "I didn't know how to move on after Marissa died," Connor began, his voice low. "For a long time, I didn't want to. It felt wrong to smile too wide or feel something new. But since you and Riley came into our lives, I feel again. It's not guilt anymore, it's hope." Renee looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I know how to let someone in again. My ex, he didn't just betray me. He shattered the way I saw love. I've spent so long making sure Riley didn't feel that loss too." "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," Connor said, "but I can promise I'll never lie to you, or leave. And if all we ever are is friends who care too much, fine. But I want to try, for real." Renee wiped at her eyes, smiling through the nerves. "I want to try too. I'm scared, but I don't want fear running my life." Connor reached for her hand and held it gently. "So what do we do?" she asked. He grinned. "We start slow. Go on a date this weekend." She laughed softly, heart lighter than it had felt in years. "Okay. One date then? Let's see where this goes." And for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt alone in it. The next morning, Connor and Renee sat Tatum and Riley down in the living room. The kids, still in their pajamas, looked up curiously as the grown-ups exchanged a glance. "So," Connor began, rubbing the back of his neck, "we wanted to tell you something." Renee smiled gently. "We've decided to go on a date. Just the two of us. Nothing big, just seeing where this goes." Tatum didn't even blink. "It's about time," he said, grabbing a piece of toast from the table. "I thought Grandpa's plan B would never work." Riley tilted her head. "Plan B?" Renee turned to Tatum, eyebrows raised. "Wait, what was Plan B?" From the recliner in the corner, Silas grinned like a man who just won a quiet bet. Plan B was simple. Make Connor jealous. Connor's jaw dropped. "That's why Jack was here? You planned that?" Silas shrugged. "Of course. Jack's not trying to settle down. He still thinks cereal is a full dinner. He just played his part." Connor shook his head, laughing in disbelief. "You really thought that would work, didn't it?" Silas said, sipping his coffee with a smug smile. Renee looked at them both, amused and exasperated. "You set all that up just to push us together?" Silas grinned. "Sometimes love just needs a little nudge." Riley giggled, leaning into her mom. "I like Jack, but I like Mr. Connor more." Connor looked at her, his heart full. "Thanks, kiddo." The room filled with laughter, the awkwardness replaced by warmth. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it worked. And for the first time, the whole house felt aligned. Not just like a place they all lived, but like a home. After their second date, a quiet evening walk through the park, followed by a late-night takeout on Connor's porch. It was obvious to both of them. This wasn't a phase, a fling, or something fragile. They were all the way in. The kind of couple people looked at and just knew. Renee felt it in the way Connor watched her when she spoke, how his voice softened around her name, how Riley and Tatum moved together like they'd been siblings forever. But as real as it all felt, Renee couldn't ignore the weight of logistics and responsibility. She had a job, bills, a child to raise, and technically she was still Silas's caregiver, something she'd begun to feel increasingly conflicted about. "I've been thinking," she said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner, "about my position here. Working at the hospital and being your dad's caregiver while being with you. It's messy." Connor nodded, drying his hands on a towel. "I agree. Maybe we should consider other options." "Like what?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I need the hospital job. It pays the bills." He hesitated before speaking, careful with his words. "Didn't the community center ask you to come on full-time?" She nodded. "They did, but the pay isn't enough. It's not even close." Connor took a breath, stepping closer. "I've been thinking, what if you and Riley moved in here?" Renee's eyes widened. "And maybe," he continued, voice steady but nervous, "you consider marrying me when the time is right." "You've thought about marriage?" she said, stunned. Connor smiled. Since you said yes to our first date, Renee stared at him, heart racing, a mix of shock and warmth rising in her chest. That's a lot to think about. A new job, a new home, another husband. I know, Connor said gently. We're not rushing anything. We'll take our time. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm in it for the long haul. I just wanted you to know where my heart is. And maybe start imagining what our life could look like together. Renee exhaled slowly, processing his words. It wasn't pressure. It was honesty. It was love without conditions. I'll need to talk to Riley, she said softly. See how she feels. This isn't just my life, it's hers too. And after everything with her father, I have to make sure she's okay. Connor nodded, reaching for her hand. Of course, she comes first, always. They stood in the quiet kitchen, hands intertwined, 1,000 thoughts in Renee's head, but one feeling steady in her heart. This was the beginning of something real, something worth thinking about. The next day, the school carnival was in full swing. Laughter and music filled the air, the scent of popcorn and cotton candy drifting through the crisp autumn breeze. Renee and Riley had volunteered to help run the game booths, doing their part to help raise money for Tatum's school's annual winter ball. Riley was busy challenging kids to a ring toss, while Renee chatted with a few other parents near the bake sale table. Tatum, darting between games with a snow cone in hand, was all smiles. The day felt light and joyful, a far cry from the days when he barely spoke. As Tatum ran up to his classroom teacher, Mrs. Mays, he waved excitedly. Mrs. Mays, I want you to meet my family. The teacher smiled warmly. Well, hello, Tatum. Who do we have here? Tatum beamed, pointing proudly. This is my mom, Renee, and my sister, Riley. Connor and Renee, who had just joined them, froze in place. Renee's eyes widened slightly. Connor's eyebrows lifted, but neither said a word. They both managed polite smiles, hiding their surprise behind practiced faces. Mrs. Mays gave a pleasant nod. It's so nice to meet you, Renee. You've got a sweet boy. Thank you, Renee said softly, stealing a glance at Connor, whose face said, Did you hear that too? Later that evening, back at the house after dinner, Connor couldn't hold it in. So, when did you start calling Renee mom and Riley your sister? Tatum looked up from his homework, completely unfazed. Since the science fair, he said. Riley told everyone I was her brother and no one even questioned it. And if Riley is my sister, then obviously Renee is my mom. Renee's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling up. In the quiet that followed, she knelt down in front of Tatum and pulled him into a tight hug. You have no idea what that means to me, she whispered, her voice breaking. Tatum smiled and hugged her back, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Connor watched from across the room, his heart full. This family, they weren't forming, they were already formed. Renee couldn't stop crying, not quiet, graceful tears, but the kind that just poured out, no matter how much she tried to collect herself. Her chest hitched, her cheeks were soaked, and her arms were wrapped tightly around Tatum, as if she'd been waiting years to hear those words. Silas wandered into the living room, squinting at the scene. What's going on? He asked, cane tapping softly against the floor. Connor, still a little stunned himself, turned toward his father with a half smile. Tatum called her mom. Silas's face lit up instantly. Oh yeah? He chuckled. Well then, we better brace ourselves. Wait till you see the Mother's Day card that boy's been working on with me. We're gonna need a boat and a paddle to float through those tears. Renee laughed through her sobs, shaking her head, overwhelmed in the best way. She and Riley ended up staying the night, Renee still too emotional to safely drive home, even hours later. Connor got her a blanket and led her to the sofa, where they curled up together, the steady hum of the house comforting them both. By morning, the soft glow of cartoons filled the room. Tatum and Riley had turned on the TV and were sitting cross-legged on the floor, giggling at some animated show. Renee stirred beside Connor, her head resting against his shoulder. Her eyes were puffy, but her smile was real. Connor leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. She looked up at him, still drowsy, and whispered, Yes. He furrowed his brow, amused. Yes to what? Yes, she said again, more clearly this time. Yes to our future. To all of this. Connor paused, his heart leaping into his throat. He looked over at the kids, then back at her, then slowly reached into his pocket. Hey kids, he called. Can you turn off the TV for a sec? The screen went dark. Riley turned around with a curious smile. Tatum looked puzzled, but followed her lead. Connor stood up, then dropped to one knee right there in front of the couch. Renee, he said, voice steady but full of feeling. We've walked through a lot to get here. You've changed my life and my son's in ways I never thought possible. I don't want a future that doesn't have you in it. So, he opened the small box in his hand. Will you marry me? Renee gasped, tears immediately springing back to her eyes. She nodded quickly, then said it out loud. Yes, yes, Connor. Kids erupted with cheers, jumping up and down. Riley squealed and hugged Tatum. I told you they were going to get married. Silas, standing in the hallway with his phone out, was already recording the entire moment. I knew it, he muttered with a satisfied grin. And they said Plan B was crazy. In that moment, surrounded by joy, laughter, and a slightly smug grandfather, they weren't just a blended family. They were one. The wedding wasn't grand, but it was perfect. A backyard ceremony beneath the oak tree, where the kids once played, and laughter had built the foundation of their bond. Riley wore a light blue dress and held the rings. Tatum walked Silas down the aisle, grinning like he was escorting royalty. Connor and Renee stood hand in hand, their eyes locked. Not because everything was easy, but because they had chosen each other through the hard parts. They'd built something steady from broken pieces, something stronger because of where they'd been. When the vows were said and the cheers went up, Silas was the loudest of all, capturing the moment on his phone like he had since day one, then proudly declaring to the guests, "Told you my plan would work." Later, after the cake was gone and the stars began to dot the sky, Connor and Renee sat on the porch swing with the kids nestled beside them, tired and happy. The night was quiet. Their home was full, and for the first time in a long time, for all of them, life felt whole. Not perfect, but real. And that was more than enough. The end. Hope you enjoyed this wonderful story by Green Tea Tales. Like, share,